Disneyland had gone down a treat. The girls loved every moment of it. One of the most wonderful and admirable things about kids is that as long as there is more than one, they can turn waiting in line into an epic adventure. I took lots of pictures and let the girls call home every night and tell their mom about their big vacation. Not in a gloating way, mind you. The fact that their squealing joy compounded her misery was just a nice bonus. Other than phone calls, I honestly don't know what Karen occupied her time with that week. All I know is that she hardly ever appeared in my thoughts. And there are no words in any language in existence to express what a relief that was for me. Suddenly, I was able to sleep at night and taste the food I ate during the day. It was a clear and powerful feeling. Honestly, it was like taking powerful psychotropic drugs. The last few months have been a horrible journey, but I thought I had finally overcome it to the point where it could no longer hurt me. There were a few obvious flaws in that logic, not the least of which was that I still wasn't interested in sex. Or maybe that wasn't quite right. There were plenty of beautiful women walking around in the sunshine, and I could recognize their attractiveness and even admire it from afar. Whatever successes I'd had, they could do nothing to repair the shattered ego that had emerged after I'd learned of my wife's infidelity. I met Karen in the prime of her life. I was young, fit, with a mop of hair on my head, and from the moment I met her, I gave her all of myself. But it wasn't enough for her, if my best, my absolute peak, wasn't enough for someone who'd already invested so much of herself in me. What could I offer anyone else? It's silly logic, but being a betrayed spouse is like falling out of a tree. The more you love them, the farther you have to fall, and the more disoriented you are from hitting the ground. If you ever meet someone who tells you they were able to just get to their feet, brush the dust off their pants, and walk on, know that falling wasn't that far for them. So no, I wasn't completely healed, but that was okay. I was happy with the progress I'd made, and the thought of sex was now so wrapped up in anxiety and sadness that I didn't particularly want my desire to return. To make a long story short, we had a great week and then came home. When we got back, Karen seemed kind of sad and withdrawn, although she made an effort to ask the girls about their trip and smiled and laughed a lot with them. She continued to see Carl, but there was something different about her now. Less outgoing. She wasn't as energetic and cheerful as she had been in the last few months. As for me, I guess you could say I noticed it, but I didn't take the time to think about what it meant. I was glad that she finally realized the position we were in and seemed to be trying to find a way to live with it rather than change the status quo. 3 weeks after our return, however, I felt tension rising up my spine when Karen tentatively asked if I wanted to attend the next Bailey gathering. I didn't know they were having such an event, I replied slowly. They called a couple days ago and invited us, Karen explained. She threw me a nervous glance. If you don't want to go, I frowned, remembering what had happened the last time we'd gone to an event like this, but then pushed the thought aside. Girls like it, I told her, and we both realized that was an answer in itself. I'm not going anywhere near it, she assured me. Don't waste our time with promises like that. They mean nothing. But I couldn't stop hoping that maybe that's what she meant this time. She fidgeted, moved a little, and wrinkled her pillow. Son! After a minute, she turned around, scratching her shoulder irritably. Then she sighed and stirred again. I just lay there in the dark and listened. It was a game I had been playing for a long time. I even looked forward to the quiet calm that the night brought with it. It was new to her, and I have no doubt it was unpleasant for her. Tom Bailey must be doing well at work. They remodeled the kitchen and replaced all the furniture on the deck. The sun was just starting to set. I was just starting to enjoy the alcohol. And all in all, it was a pretty pleasant time when she leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Please stop looking at him." I hummed, shifting my gaze to the couple we were sitting with, but didn't react in any other way. And I couldn't help but look in his direction a few more times, just to make sure it was still happening. It was still happening. I guess the constant distraction caused the conversation to get all bad, because a few minutes later, the other couple apologized and left. Honestly, John, Karen pleaded, you have to stop looking at him. Forget he's even here. He's looking at me, I snapped back, and it pisses me off. In fact, he was more staring than looking, and it was like that for most of the night. His facial expression alternated between an icy grimace and a mocking grin. Mostly he looked like a cranky child. He also drank too much, which was a bad combination in my opinion. Because of that, he was worth keeping an eye on. He's just jealous, Karen pouted, looking around to make sure no one could hear us. And to me, he's being incredibly childish. But there's nothing we can do right now, so please just ignore him. That's the best way. You're trying to ignore someone who's been putting holes in the back of your head all night long. It's almost as hard as ignoring someone who's stabbing you in the back. She folded her arms across her chest and shook her leg irritably. Well, I wish he'd just go home. He's making a fool of himself. Maybe you should take him home then. I'm sure that's what he wants. Her face flushed and she opened her mouth, then closed it and looked away. You know, she said wistfully, for a while I really thought we were having a good time. For a while I agreed with you. That was before someone's eyeballs started drilling into the back of my skull. How could he think people wouldn't understand if he just sat there staring at me for 3 hours? She finished her drink too quickly. He's being childish, she repeated, as if that in itself was the answer. So we sat like that for a while. The mood was ruined for both of us, and I found myself becoming strangely contemplative. How did it start? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She only took a deep breath and continued not to look at me. Honestly, Karen, from the tapes and notes, I never really understood how it all started. I really don't want to talk about it, and certainly not here. Was it seduction? Or, if you're trying to get me to say I wish it never happened, she snarled, you can leave it out. I wish it never happened. I wish it every damn day. I'm not nitpicking or trying to start an argument. I shook my head. I just don't understand how you could do this to me, I admitted. There was no pain or anger in my voice. It was cold as stone fact. I don't understand how you could do that to us, you know? To us, Karen. To the girls. Do you know I'd die for you? No exaggeration. I shook my head. I would have died. There are still things in my life worth dying for. They just don't have anything to do with you. Damn you. She pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting the urge to cry. Don't you dare do this to me. I shrugged. Okay, I'm sorry. I looked up at the sunset. It just happens to me at weird moments, you know? You shouldn't feel like you have to apologize for it. Maybe I don't, but I am sorry. I looked around. He's gone. Do you think he went home? I don't want to think about him right now. I looked at my bottle of beer. A strange urge swept over me. Well, do you want to dance? She didn't answer, probably figuring I was being sarcastic. Come on, I prodded. What do you think? I'm no better off than I was before, but it can't be any worse. Now she was looking at me. I find it hard to believe you'd ever want to dance with me. Why? A pause. I wouldn't want to dance with me. A point in your favor. Look, you don't have to understand. I don't have to understand either. Let's just dance. An uncertain smile appeared on her face. But there's not even music here. 2 minutes later, we were standing on the lawn by the corner of the deck, swaying to non-existent songs that were playing in our heads. We didn't snuggle up to each other or put our heads on each other's shoulders or anything like that. We just held hands and swayed. Some of the other couples looked at us from time to time, probably assuming they were witnessing a moment of tender intimacy. But it wasn't like that. It was more like announcing a truce. You know, she once said over my shoulder, this is the most physical contact we've had since... She tilted her head and didn't finish the thought. I'm aware of that. Her lips moved slightly and I could almost see the internal conversation going on in her head. I waited, knowing that once she figured it out, she'd invite me over. I want to be on your side, she finally said, looking at me with sad eyes. I want to be on the side of those who strive to make things easier for the girls. You're already on that side. You always have been. She snorted derisively. Only when it was to my advantage, or when you screwed me over. Fair enough. There are some rules you won't like. I don't have to like them. Tell me, and I'll be proud of you. It's just one thing, really, and here's the thing. If you ever, even once, try to take them away from me, I'll kill you. Without hesitation, without guilt, without sympathy, like killing a dog, I will take your life for it. I continued to dance. I didn't say it with a threat or an attempt to intimidate. It was just another cold fact. To her credit, she didn't tense up, flinch, or do anything of the sort. "That's how I know you're a good father," she said quietly. I was thirsty that night, so I went into the kitchen for a glass of water. Her cell phone vibrated on the counter, and the screen was lit up. I glanced at it. 17 missed calls, all from tonight, all after the party. Hmm. Saturday morning is a lonely time for a grocery store. There was almost no one there, and almost everyone who was there was a man over 40. The old lady behind the counter noticed me looking around, or maybe she was just being chatty. "We call it D-Day," she explained with a smile. "On Saturday mornings, all the divorced dads come into shop." She leaned forward conspiratorially, pressing her masculine figure against the scanner. "I think it's because there aren't any happy couples around, so they don't feel lonely on Saturday mornings. All the happy people stay home and live as a family." I just stared at her, not reacting. After a moment, she straightened up, taking it as a sign that she had misstep. "I'm sorry," she stammered out, hurrying to finish with the packages. "I saw the ring on your finger and just thought—" Karen must have meant what she said, because the next few weeks went very smoothly. She was smiling at home, and we actually worked pretty well as a family. For the most part, her departure was planned to minimize the impact on the girls. And maybe, just maybe, she was trying to minimize the impact on me as well. Nevertheless, I found that I was tired of staying home all the time, so I started going out more with the girls during Karen's absence. Before the end of the summer, we managed to go on 2 more short vacations and visit some interesting places within a 60-mile radius of home. I also changed my sedan for a newer and roomier van, a family unit, not quite like the one Karen had so quickly traded in, and bought a nice expandable camper. Karen endured these motherless trips stoically, even though I could see she was in pain at missing out on precious memories. She didn't complain, even as bags appeared under her eyes, and her smile began to look sadder and sadder. She started taking pills to help her sleep at night, though I didn't see them making any difference. What she didn't keep quiet about was the effect these adventures were having on our finances. "I know, John. It seems justified to you," she insisted one evening over a pile of bills and statements. "And I'm well aware that I'm in no position to lecture you, but these are all non-essentials, and they're sucking the juices out of us. You've far exceeded our income level, and we're up to our ears in fresh debt. If you don't curb it, and fast, we will never be able to retire." Still we, as I see it. "Who wants to retire?" I snorted. "Look, we have trust funds from my parents' inheritance to cover college costs and help the girls get out into the world, and your retirement is a long way off. I'm not actually going to quit my job. I don't know what I'd do with myself if I had years and years to just sit at home and do nothing." I chuckled wryly. "I'd probably do something stupid, like start drinking." She bit her lip, setting aside the statements and bills. "There was a time when you talked about us selling the house, buying a mobile home, and traveling the country," she remarked. "Have an adventure that would be just for us?" I laughed briefly and she looked away. "I suppose that's all in the past now, isn't it? You couldn't think I'd still want to do it with you?" She bestowed the same sad smile on me still. "I didn't think about it for a very long time. I just acted and didn't think about how my actions affected my life. So what could I say to that? Oh, then I decided to break the inevitable. You know, at some point we should probably sit down and figure out how old the girl should be so we can get a divorce in peace." Her eyes widened and her face went pale, but I ignored it. It wasn't like she didn't know it was coming. It was never a permanent arrangement. I thought it would be safe after they got to college. Then they'd be distracted. But she was already gone, running out of the room. The chair she had occupied was lying on its back, and papers were strewn haphazardly across the floor. I gathered them up and began trying to put them into their respective stacks. There were a few days of silence after that, and then everything went back to normal. In fact, things stayed normal for a few more weeks, and I started to think that maybe we had finally found a system that worked for us. In any case, there was no need to plan for divorce. It was years away. Chapter 7. Winter came slowly. The change in weather patterns meant that instead of the usual dry chill and dusting of snow, October was dewy wet. I guess I'd noticed that Karen had been showing up at the house more often in recent weeks, and that she'd started leaving her phone on the charger when we went out as a family. But I hadn't given much thought to what that might mean. I just assumed it would be business as usual from here on out. So I was completely unprepared when one evening she sat down on the couch across from me, looking stressed and tired, and told me it was over. "I just can't take it anymore, John," she explained. "It's too stressful, and I'm ashamed of myself all the time. I can't live like this anymore." I held my breath but waited. She folded her arms and looked down at them. "You know, sometimes when I'm alone, or when I'm in the shower, I find myself just crying and crying for no reason. I try to pull myself together, but I can't do it. No matter what I do, I cry and cry and cry, and there's no way I can stop." She shook her head bitterly. "It's my own fault. I know it is. But—" She sighed, and then her voice hardened. "For a while, I really fell for you, if it helps. I thought I had to play along with you to save myself. Thought that time would somehow solve all the problems I created if I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. Hell, for a while I even thought I was lucky." She shook her head again, already faster and in much shorter spurts. "Anyway, it's over now. You can do what you want, but I'm telling you here and now that it's over." I froze, unmoving except for my eyes. I wasn't even close to being ready for this. "I told you what would happen if you tried to take them away from me," I warned. "Take them away? What are you saying?" She stopped, frowning. "No, no, not you and me. I don't mean the United States, John. I mean Carl. Or me and Carl. It's over. Forever. I told him 3 days ago, and it took me that long to work up the courage to tell you." "Unacceptable," I snapped back. Even to me, it sounded stupid and unhelpful. She noticed it too and let out a tired chuckle. "That's too bad because it's really over. And I can't tell you how glad I am to say that. Think about what you're doing here, Karen. Think about what will happen if you do this." She looked at me unafraid. "You know," she said wistfully, "I was really afraid of you for a long time. You said those awful things and you knew everything. And you knew all the things I thought you couldn't know. And you were stern, so serious, so angry. You were just pulling the wool over my eyes. I believed every threat you made was true, that heeding your words was the only possible way for me to pass unscathed." She furrowed her brow, and there was something akin to mild surprise in her voice. "Was I really that blind? Or are you just that good a mage? Because I swear I saw a snarling dog baring its teeth and heard the most sinister sounds I've ever heard in my life. I just reacted to those sounds, reacted to them like a gutless creature. I didn't even notice that the beast in front of me was cowering in a corner. I didn't notice that you were in danger all along." She wiped her eyes. "I'm so sorry for what I did to you. I'm sorry I cornered you, wounded and scared, and left you with only the sound of your own growling to fight back. You'll never know how sorry I am for that, because you would never be cruel enough to do that to someone else. You would never have done what I did." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "To be honest, I don't even know how to feel about the last 6 months or even the last year of my life. I know that I feel very ashamed, but beyond that, it's like I've been walking around in a fog, and it's only now starting to dissipate." She looked at me expectantly, but I said nothing. I was a prison guard, watching in horror as a prisoner begins to realize that she'd had the weapon all along, and I was scared. She continued, "You know what's funny? It's just ended. It was so simple. I looked at him and everything disappeared. I didn't feel anything. I didn't want anything. I just wanted him gone. He saw me looking at him, mistook my expression for affection, and tried to take my hand. His touch," she rubbed her hands together, "made me sick, physically sick. He made me feel bad. I felt sick." Another bitter laugh. "He didn't take it very well when I told him." She rolled up her sleeve to reveal the disappearing bruise girdling the entire top of her arm. "Somehow I don't expect you to be surprised. And somehow I can't figure out why. I threw my whole life away for a man who had absolutely no shame about physically hurting me. Hell, maybe you saw those traits in him all along. Maybe that's why you encouraged me to continue. She studied my face, but I offered nothing. Anyway, she sighed, pushing back her sleeve. I was such an idiot. That's the kind of idiot I am. So it's time to find out what kind of idiot you are. Are you the kind of idiot who gives up the only thing he has left to fight for because the fight got a little harder? Or are you the kind of idiot who stays at the table even after their last bluff has been called? She swallowed hard and a single tear rolled down her cheek. I'll be honest, John. I really hope you turn out to be the idiot who stays. I just wish. She shook her head again, from which a small sob escaped, and stood up. I'll leave you alone for a while. I, I'm sorry for what I did, more than I could ever say. But on the threshold, she stopped, pulled herself together, and turned to say, and you really need to eat more, John. For your own good, your skin and bones. I turned away and she walked away. For a long time after that, I just sat there, shadows creeping slowly across the room, not knowing what to think or what to do. Sometime around midnight, I got up and rubbed my eyes. I'm not hungry, I said to no one in particular. November passed like a sickness. It dragged on, distorting the passage of time, and when it left us, we were more exhausted and weakened than ever before. Karen was home all the time now. She still claimed the novel was finished. I could have hoped it wasn't, but I was so busy praying it was. She was attentive and caring, but aloof at the same time. I could see that there was a lot going on inside her, and very little that she shared with the rest of us. She seemed to me like a widow, or someone who was only now coming to the realization of how little he liked himself. Either way, she was quiet. We both still managed to put on a show when the girls were around, but we had nothing else to do. December wasn't any better, and soon even I hoped she would come out of it. I don't know why exactly, but I was worried that it might start affecting the girls. Anyway, it wasn't until the week before Christmas that she asked me to stick around and talk to her, a hint of worry read in her eyes. She must have shared it, because I could feel it creeping into mine. We sat down at the kitchen table, a glass of wine in front of each of us, and she frowned for a long time, staring into her glass before she looked up at me and said, I don't know what to do, and I need your help. With what? With us, with you, and most of all, probably with me. She started to raise her wine glass, but her hands shook and she set it back down. I keep trying to think of ways to help you heal or undo the damage I've done, and I can't find anything. I know. I know I've ruined everything, and I know you don't owe me anything for that. All I'm asking for is a chance to redeem myself somehow, to maybe make what happens next a little easier for all of us. I don't understand what you're asking me to do, I admitted slowly. Yes, you do, she insisted. And I know you do. Just let me understand where we are, John. Let me understand who we are. You don't have to do anything else. Promise anything else. But just give me a little. Please. It's not as little as you think, darling. In fact, you're entering a very dark place. I leaned back and poured the entire glass of wine down my throat. You're not going to like this, I warned her quietly. I didn't ask you to make me like it. Smart answer. Okay, who am I to argue with you on that? I studied her for a moment, assessing the determination in her eyes. We'll see how long that lasts. You're nothing to me, I admitted honestly. That's exactly what you are. Nothing at all. The determination remained. Explain. What is there to explain? I held out my hands. To be honest, I don't even know who this person sitting across from me is. She's a foreigner, a stranger. She probably has my wife's name or the one she used to go by. But if I can say anything definite, it's that you're not her. My wife had just a hint of weight around her middle, and she was fine with that. You don't have that. You're not her. My wife had long, beautiful hair that came down below her shoulders and framed her smile in a way that she knew I adored, and that was special to me. You don't have that. You're not her. My wife drove a van, and you have an SUV. My wife put her family first, and you put yourself first. And I will apologize for knowing so much about your personal life, but I have seen very clear evidence of what you like to do in bed, or anywhere else for that matter. Things that my wife has never even tried, and certainly has no desire to try. So you aren't, not her. I leaned forward. Do you understand what I'm saying? You're not my wife. You are not her. You are not my wife. I took a deep breath, calming myself down. My wife was a wonderful person. I can't even describe her in words you'll understand. In a world full of women, she was the woman. In a life full of questions, she was the answer. And I don't know if you'll ever be able to understand how much I miss her. At the last words, my voice cracked, and I looked away. She seemed to shrink a little in her chair, but there was still a look of determination on her face. I guess she was preparing herself for what was going to be a difficult conversation. I understand what you're trying to say, John. Or, she looked away from my warning glance. I understand what it means. But honestly, hair and physicality are just looks. A car is a car. They're just minor changes. You can't honestly say you like it better when I'm a little fat than she wasn't fat. Don't you dare. That elicited a patient look from me. A little fat, she repeated. Not like this. I'm in the best shape of my life. People, women, compliment me all the time. I have a confidence I never had before. I'm happier when I look like this. Isn't that a good thing? Sure, it's a good thing. So just don't change, and these women can have you. I'm okay with that. I mean, it's not like I don't want you. And my hair. She reached up, ignoring the jab, and shook her hand through her bangs. It's just hair, John. I know you liked it long, but it was so hard to take care of. That's what women in their 30s do anyway. They get shorter haircuts, more mature haircuts, and you can't tell me you don't think it's cute. I burst into laughter. You think you can outplay my feelings? Is that what this is? If you just explain to me why I should like the haircut your boyfriend picked out for you, everything will just happen on its own? Is that how you think feelings work? I just want to say that I regret what guided me in making that change. And no, by the way, he didn't choose that haircut for me, but that doesn't mean they're bad changes. They're not dependent on my offenses. I just got a little lazy about my appearance, and I needed to start thinking about my hair and my body like a grown woman, like a woman in her 30s who needs to age gracefully and think about middle age and how it's going to look. For goodness sake, I changed my diet, started exercising, and looking for haircut ideas weeks before the affair started. You can't blame my haircut for. That doesn't make them independent of each other. Do you really believe it's a coincidence that you felt the need to completely reinvent yourself just before you decided to give yourself a little extra on the side? Or that you cut your hair short right after Carl told you he likes short haircuts on women? That doesn't mean that all those changes are because of him. I gave up, waving her off. You're still doing it, I remarked. An exasperated sigh and a bitter, what, came in response. Trying to change my feelings through argument and persuasion. It's not going to happen, and it doesn't need to. You realize that, don't you? As much as I miss my wife, I have to tell you, I'm actually glad you're not her. I'm glad that the memories of the person sitting in front of me are completely separate from the memories of the woman I loved. It makes me feel so much better. Well, I don't want to go back to being a nondescript thing with an uncomfortable pant size and messy hair. Then don't. If you think so little of that man, then don't ever become him again. What makes you think I'm suggesting you do that? Anyway, I don't know who put it into your head that this is what you looked like before, but you were. I stopped and laughed. Now you've got me arguing with feelings too. Just forget about it, okay, Karen? Just forget it. No. She looked at me with heated disappointment for a minute, then visibly relaxed and tapped her finger on her wine glass. Maybe I should ask you a different question? As if it wasn't. I'm listening. If you could, a deep breath. If you could answer that question without being sarcastic, bitter, or just laughing at me, I'd appreciate it. But if you have to do that, I think I'd understand. I wonder. Ask. If you were in my shoes. She looked up at me, probably expecting the mocking laughter to be interrupted so soon, but I just waited. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? If you had failed, fallen as far as I have, and were trying to make things right somehow, what would you do? What would you do to start that process? Things will never be right. Please, John, No need for words, you know what I'm asking? I knew, and I thought for a moment. I would leave. I'd leave and give everyone the distance they need to start recovering without me. If it takes forever, I'll probably never come back. No, you won't come back. You're not leaving your family. No way. You're right, I wouldn't. But it was worth a try. I suppose I do everything in my power to try to get back to who I used to be. The person, the beliefs and dreams that kept me from being so selfish for most of my history. I would discard anything that wasn't part of who I used to be, and I'd say a few proverbial Hail Marys, open up to people I never would have wanted to open up to, in hopes that the shame of those moments would serve as some kind of lesson, and things like that. I took a deep breath. And I think an affair is a selfish act, so I would try not to do anything selfish for a very long time. I would try to, I don't know, eradicate that tendency in myself. She was silent for a long moment. Well, that's something to think about. And I'd have to hurt the person I cheated on you with, even if they didn't deserve it, or if I didn't think they deserved it, I'd have to hurt them very badly. She flinched. She didn't like that part. Why? I thought for a moment. Well, probably because for a while I put them above you. I took an active part in their happiness, at your expense, at your eternal expense. And sharing that happiness with them at the time must have been far more important to me than what you might feel as a result, than your life itself, or I never would have done it. I wiped my eyes. I would need to show you that while I put this other man far above you for that short time, his long-term importance to me was less than nothing. I would need to take things to the extreme to show you. I don't know what. I don't know what it would show you, but I would do it. I would do it, and I would never look back. She stared at me, her eyes widening and her lips parted. I believe you would do it, she said quietly. For a while we sat like that. There's one more thing, John. If you're going to tell me you're pregnant, oh God, no, She caught my crooked smile. Very funny. No, it's not. But I was still smiling at the horror reflected on her face. She paused to gather her thoughts, then continued. I don't know how to talk about it, but her eyes slid nervously over my face, then to the side. I mean, I know you haven't had sex in a while, but we're done. I stood up and left the room. To her credit, she didn't follow me or chase me or anything like that. If she had, things wouldn't have gone well. Chapter 2. Daddy? Yes, honey? Can I ask you something? We had just come from a Friday night movie night, and I was surprised at how tired I was. I couldn't wait to put the girls to bed and pass out immediately. Come on, honey, I said tiredly. She tugged on my coat sleeve. To the movies? Yeah? Daddy saved the family because he was strong, right? I kicked off my shoes. Of course he was, honey. Why aren't you as strong? I froze and closed my eyes. What kind of question had been asked? Pretty strong, honey. No, you're not strong, she insisted. You're thin. I turned to look at Karen. Her expression was somewhere between pity and, I told you so. Thanks for your help, bitch. I turned away from them all. I'm stronger than you think, I told the room. I'm stronger than any of you. But you're pretty skinny, another little voice behind me insisted. Chapter 10. I don't know exactly how she did it, but everyone was there. Coming home from work, I found a house full of people. All the people in our social circle, everyone I usually saw or hoped to see at one of Bailey's parties were there. Even people who rarely attended parties were sitting here and there, sipping drinks and laughing. And there were also people there that I didn't want to see, but I didn't notice them at first. In fact, as soon as I got to the door, Karen jumped up and started yelling at the whole house, demanding attention. I need everyone to gather in the living room, she shouted. I have a surprise announcement to make, and I need everyone to hear it. I caught her questioning look, but she ignored it, turning away and waving people into the living room. I rounded the corner with nervous curiosity and felt my blood pressure skyrocket. There in the corner of the room stood Carl. Had she invited him into my house? Had the damn bitch brought him to my home? After everything she'd said over the past few months? After he hurt her, She brought him into the house where our kids live? Before I could react, Karen turned to the group. I have something to tell you, she announced, and it's not going to be easy for me, so I'd appreciate it if you all would show a little patience. She looked at me, and who knows what she saw there, but she took a deep breath and continued. I want everyone here to know what my husband has been doing for his family over the last year. I, I've done something very selfish, something horrible, and in response to that, he spent all of his energies worrying about someone other than himself. He put them into protecting our children. I owe him for that more than I can say. Some people in the crowd looked at me, not sure where this was going. I wasn't sure either. After all, she hadn't really done it, had she? It didn't take long to find out. I was having an affair. That phrase landed right on everyone like a live grenade, and all the air left the room. Suddenly, no one was looking at me. There was nothing wrong with my marriage, my husband, my life. I just allowed myself to be dragged into something it never occurred to me to do. Worse, I disrespected all of you in the process. Carl looked around the room, nervous. All of his friends were about to find out how safe it was to keep him around. Our gazes met, and he had the courage to look at me pleadingly. You're on your own now. Welcome to the club. I had an affair, Karen continued. I stole time away from my husband and children to be with another man. I risked everything I had for nothing. I didn't try to prevent it. I thought life owed me something. And to make matters worse, the man who took me away from the people whose lives I had to protect with my own was none other than my husband's supposed friend, Carl Jensen. A sigh and a soft muttering came from somewhere. He stalked me, seduced me, and I let him. Worse, I wanted him to. I encouraged him. People looked around the room, finding Carl and whispering with their spouses. He was suddenly very interested in finding his shoes. Some of you have complimented me on the changes in my appearance over the past year. Now those changes were due in part to my affair. It was my way of distancing myself from the woman I was and the people I loved. She held out her hands in acknowledgement. They don't look very pretty in that light, do they? Some of you may remember how my husband got sick at one of the parties last summer, even though he didn't seem to have had much to drink. It was because he discovered that Carl and I were using all of you to play a little game with each other, to see if we could act like a couple in front of you and still pull the wool over your eyes. We were selfish, stupid, and mean. Some of you may not want to be my friend anymore after hearing this, but I hope you continue to support John. He's fighting for his family, for his daughter's well-being, and it's destroying him. You've all seen it happen. It hasn't escaped any of you how much weight he's lost and how quiet he's become. He's lost everything, and instead of dwelling on that fact, he's doing everything he can to make sure he doesn't lose others as well. She looked at me again and smiled tiredly before continuing. You should also know that Carl was very practical and very effective in his seduction. I won't pretend that I was as hard to get as I should have been, but without going into detail, I promise you that it was a determined pursuit, almost clinically professional. I'm only telling you this as a warning to you all to be more careful than I am. She looked around the room like a teacher waiting for questions, then said, I'm sorry that I lured you all here under false pretenses. I'm sorry that I've abused your trust in me in the past. I know the party seems over now, but I would ask you to stay, have a drink, chat, and have fun. Gossip about me. Ask John how he's doing. Let your kids play downstairs. I'm about to leave, so I won't be in your way. Besides, she grimaced, it's high time I went and told my mom what I've been up to all these months. No. She walked over to me and held out her hand for a hug. I gave her a brief hug and pulled back. You didn't have to do that. Like hell I did. But she looked like death was looming over her as she turned to walk away. I watched her walk away and then turned around to see a sea of faces staring at me. I half smiled and shrugged. Isn't anyone in this place going to offer me a drink? What else was I going to say? A few awkward laughs erupted, but the rest of the night went fine. Carl didn't linger. You could have warned me, I told her. Even given me a chance to stop you if I didn't want to. But there wasn't an ounce of venom in my voice. I was amused by it. Even a little pleased, I suppose, but she nodded in agreement anyway. I was afraid something would go wrong, Maybe people would call and cancel the meeting, or maybe I'll chicken out at the last minute. And then you'll have another way of realizing that I let you down. And I think a slight half smile appeared on her face. I was also afraid that you would try to talk me out of it, that you wouldn't want me to grovel like that. But it had to be done. I couldn't keep from giggling. You killed a lot of birds with one stone, didn't you? I didn't kill any. I just stirred up the flock and let them loose. She took a test batch of oatmeal, tasted it, and blew on the bowl. You know, they won't all turn on him. At least some of them won't turn away. It'll be a scandal, and then it'll subside, and that'll be it. But they won't feel as at ease around him as they used to, and they won't be as cool about him strutting around their parties. Over time, they'll call him a little less often without admitting it to themselves, and then they'll find reasons not to invite him. They'll just pull him away from them and probably won't even realize that's what they're doing. She tasted the oatmeal again. Or that's what they'd do if they had the chance. I've learned that Carl has a knack for saving face and avoiding conflict. I don't think they'll ever get a chance to push him away. I nodded. Agreed. He'll spend the next few weeks smiling and pretending everything's fine. But it won't be long before people start noticing that he no longer calls them or answers when they call him. He'll just disappear. Deep down, he's a coward. He's also a whiner, by the way. And you cost him all the friends he had last night. I'm surprised he hasn't been yelling at our answering machine all morning. He would have used my cell phone to reduce the risk of you answering, but he won't even do that because it would just be an admission that I hurt him. Right now, he'll be in full face-saving mode, which means no contact. I nodded. Bye. We sat in silence for a few minutes, neither of us eating. Tell me, I said, how do you know I won't get mad? Or won't feel humiliated? After all, last night you basically made me look like a cuckold in front of everyone we know. If you only knew, I'd be furious about it. The same little half smile appeared on her face again, but this time it was accompanied by a sad glint in her eyes. I never doubted how you would react to my little statement. You're too big a person to worry about such a small thing as how other people look at you. And you never have to worry about that because you always treat every situation in a measured, calm, mature manner. You always offer an adult response that comes from a real concern for the people around you. That's why I knew you wouldn't get angry, and that's why I knew these people would react the way they did. They respect you, they like you, and that's why I knew they would want to be around you. Memories of last night's support night came flooding back to me, bringing a smile to my face. They're really good people. No, it's you, John. Her face tensed with disgust. I wish I didn't remember that. I wish I could keep seeing all the things that make you great instead of finding it predictable or boring or... She shrugged. I guess that's wrong, too. I didn't start seeing you as less. I just started to see myself as more. I thought I was better. I thought I was special. Without telling myself that, I thought I was smarter and more worthy than everyone around me. She lowered her gaze to her oatmeal. And I was such an ass. That was something to agree with. And now it's probably cost you your friends. Well, anyway, thanks for last night, I smiled. Ass. It was my pleasure. Then it was worth it. I sipped my coffee. It's so nice when we can agree on something. A week passed, and then I got a second surprise. I pulled into the garage after work on Wednesday, and there, instead of a practically brand new SUV, was a sedan that looked considerably older. I looked at it for a few minutes, noting the obvious signs of age and peering in the windows. Some of Karen's belongings were laying on the middle pallet. I stepped inside. Did something happen to the car? I asked, feeling curious. Oh, she said. I just thought I needed something different. Something more me, you know? She busied herself with washing dishes. It's funny, though. When I bought that big SUV, I was so tickled by it. I thought it was exactly what I needed. I thought it was perfect for me. And then it turns out I don't really like the stupid thing. It's uncomfortable in it. When I'm driving down the highway, I feel like a goddamn boat, and it sucks gasoline like you wouldn't believe. People change their minds. It happens. She threw a pot lid into the dishpan, and it sputtered noisily. I can't even figure out what I find so great about him. It just makes me miserable. So I decided to buy something else. something that would be mine. The problem with that idea was that we were broke as hell. The money I was able to get for the SUV was going to cover the car, taxes, and who knows what else. So I had to lower my expectations a few notches to make it work. She rinsed the lid off the pot and began to drain the water. The hardest thing I have to face is that right now, I want nothing more in the world than to get my old family van back. She dipped her hands into the water. But that's okay too. Whenever we go anywhere as a family, we take your van. So there's no reason for me to have anything more than just something I can get around in, right? I studied her for a while. I guess that makes sense, I offered, opening my mouth to say something else, but not knowing what else to say. She turned around. There were wrinkles under her eyes, and she didn't expect anything. I went back to the bedroom to change and find my book. Sometimes when you both know something, it's perfectly okay if neither of you say it out loud. Chapter 10. So, here we were, meeting each other. We'd gotten along pretty well for a while, and ever since she'd ended things with Carl, Karen had become completely devoted to her family. She managed to strike the perfect balance of maintaining a constant loving presence without becoming an intrusive nuisance. A few weeks after the party, I even stopped feeling the anger arising in my gut every time she entered the room. I won't pretend I didn't enjoy the bags that formed under her eyes, or the lifeless look in her eyes when she was deep in thought. But I didn't insist on encouraging those things either. And this collaboration might seem like a good thing to the uninitiated. Were we not united after all by a common goal? Didn't we interact like friendly colleagues coming together to accomplish an important project? And wasn't that everything I could have hoped for? The obvious answer was no. And the problem was that Karen didn't want to be just friendly coworkers. She wanted much more than that, and she wasn't going to give it up for anything. And that more was something she desperately needed, since she was now deprived of an alternative emotional outlet. Oh, she stuck to her strategy of patience, but the cracks quickly began to appear, and I was waiting for the day when they would dissolve the foundation beneath her entire facade. The warning signs came as early as the weekend after the party. She began a subtle but persistent campaign of minor physical contact without preamble. She would touch my arm while asking a question, or give my shoulder a quick squeeze while asking how I slept this morning, or even give me a quick and chase hug when the girls were watching and she knew I wouldn't pull away. I was still working on maintaining that distance that was so important to me, and every time I saw her swinging for possible contact, I stepped aside. But cumulatively, over time, these actions began to have the desired effect. All those little touches began to seem terribly, terribly normal. I had to try to avoid them or just outright tell her to stop. But the bigger problem underlying all of this was that on some level, a part of me actually enjoyed the contact. When it was happening, my blood pressure was still rising and my gut was still wrenching. But the flip side of that was that I was still very, very lonely. Even this small, simple thing. Her fingers and thumbs squeezing my shoulder when she said good morning to me was the most human feeling I'd felt in a long time. And as much as I wanted to separate myself from her, there was a little voice deep inside me, forever begging for just one more moment to feel like a real human being. Perhaps if I'd had some kind of outlet, if I'd considered that need from the beginning, I wouldn't have had to avoid it. But the whole experience was like being shot in the chest and then being given the opportunity to record one last message for your children before you bleed to death. Here you were, in a fog of shock, having to devote all your rapidly dwindling resources to the one task you deemed worthy of completion. Everything else had to take a back seat, no matter what. Anyway, that's probably just my excuse, but that's how I felt at the time. I didn't care about myself at all because I had become a ghost to my eyes myself. A ghost. Now I was starting to go out into the world, and I hadn't taken care to prepare myself for what would happen when I got there. When she ran her fingertip along my arm, asking if the girls liked the movie, it was as if I had rediscovered that I was human, that there was more to life than just breathing in and out and wondering how long it would be before the breathing stopped. And here's the thing about what infidelity does to you. When I look at those words now, they seem like hyperbole or drama to me. But when I remember how I felt at the time, they seem inadequate. They seem like two-dimensional drawings of something that was deeply textured and complex. What I'm trying to say is that I couldn't bring myself to give up touch. The realization of this horrified me because it had implications for my future. I certainly wasn't going to fall in love with Karen again. She was no longer someone I could love, and I still didn't have even remote feelings. But I could see that these actions, however small, were a very successful form of erosion that was acting on my much-needed isolation and self-control. I knew it had to be fought. I knew it had to end. But then there was that fingernail gently scratching my neck, and couldn't I have waited a few days before telling her to stop? I kept putting it off. It was weak of me, I realize. Then two things happened that foreshadowed a more serious, impending confrontation. First, Karen got a little testy with me, and second, she started dressing more sparingly around the house. There are some things that just can't be conveyed in a story. Things like the understanding of a whole life that comes after being around a person. Things like the smallest effects that you can notice in their behavior. To an outside observer, this slight uplift in mood could have raised 1,000 different questions. As the days went by, she became more and more insistent. Lonely touches began to recur. Quick retreats began to drag on. When I pulled away, she would simply smile a knowing smile and try again later. Now, perhaps she thought that if she could get physical contact, I would eventually just break down and do the 180. But the thing was, I wasn't even close to that point, and her own frustration was growing much faster than my walls had time to crumble. So all of this could only lead to one place, and when we got there, it surprised us both. It was evening. The kids had already gone to bed. She had just reached out to me in a way that made her seem casual, but there was obvious intent in her clothing. When I pulled away for the 1,000th time, she finally grimaced and hissed, "Damn it, John, I'm really trying. Can't you at least let me stroke your shoulder a little?" Well, yeah, I shook my head. What could be more harmless than coming to stroke my shoulder in my underwear? Then, of course, you'll find that the knots in my shoulders are especially tense, right? And you'd have to really bump into them with your weight to make a difference? I snorted. What was I thinking? This is all so innocent. No need to be sarcastic. She sat down in the chair across from me, folding her arms across her chest. Yeah, okay. I'm trying to seduce you, and we both know it. What's wrong with that? You're my husband. God, what a monster I must be. Her face softened and her eyes became pleading. I'm a human being, John. I have needs, and you have them too. You shouldn't ignore them. I mean, it's been a bloody eternity for you. So don't tell me you're not the least bit disappointed. You must be tired of doing it manually all the time. She stopped talking. Something in my facial expression told her too much. Oh, she whispered, removing her hand. You've got to be kidding. She took a deep breath. You don't do it by hand, do you? You don't do it at all. John, you need to see a counselor or something. It's not good for... No. I stood up. Hell no. I'm not going to sit here and listen to a lecture from goddamn slut Carl. I'm not going to be made to feel bad or guilty because I don't want anything to do with a body that was made for that asshole. So you can just... I forced myself to stop and held up my hands. I appreciate everything you've done to make my life easier, I said carefully. I know you want to make things better. I can see that. But there comes a point when better is no longer a realistic goal. Sometimes you cure the cancer and things get better, but sometimes you just do what you can to make the person comfortable, because that's all there is left to do. You made me comfortable. I thank you for that, but now it's time to let it go. She folded her arms defiantly, not wanting to give up. You know, sometimes people insist on staying in bed long after the cancer is gone and defeated. They're afraid, John. Afraid to get out of bed. Afraid to move on with their lives. Afraid to go back to thinking about tomorrow as if it might actually come. And when it does, you have to give them a little kick in the ass, because that's the only thing that's going to make them live again. This made me angry, and in a fit of rage, I blurted out, You're a very ugly person, Karen. Do you know that? I looked her over from head to toe. You used to be a beautiful woman with a beautiful family and a beautiful life, and now you've traded it all away for Carl's ugly, skinny whore. So why don't you do us all a favor and go to hell? I left before she could respond. For the next few days, she was cold and icy towards me, and all those little touches evaporated like water in the summertime. It got to the point where she hardly spoke to me and did her best to stay out of the room if I was in it. I couldn't tell if she was angry or giving up or what. Her facial expression was unreadable. I was surprised myself, feeling a little disappointed. All those weeks of working together peacefully, of feeling like we were working together, had been pleasant. Even the unwanted physical contact carried a sense of security and stability that I liked. After all, as long as we were working toward the same goal, and as long as she was trying to get back in my favor, I didn't have to worry about tomorrow. I didn't have to think about the fact that she might give up, or go back to Carl, or just go for a divorce out of exhaustion. I didn't have to worry that there might be unforeseen problems, or that a stressful conflict loomed on the horizon. Mostly I like to feel like we were on the same side in something, even if it was completely lacking romantic overtones. Now, however, I was shut off from her, and I was left to wonder what might be on her mind. There wasn't much I could do about it except wait for her to get away, and I found myself doing just that. Throughout the workday, I had been doing internal calculations in my head, preparing for the divorce. How will the divorce affect our financial situation? How often will I be able to see my kids? Would she get married sooner rather than later? Will he become a father to the girls? What kind of father? Many old fears were coming to light again. It really tormented me. The girls growing up with a new father. I had missed huge chunks of their formative years, learning about everything post facto, and certainly getting involved late enough in the game to offer any preparatory advice or support. It was the last step toward loneliness, the last breath of the life I had once lived. I had a hard time staying still for longer than a few seconds at a time, and paced until I had a bruise on the underside of my left arm. I found myself gravitating toward the room where the children were, or just looking for excuses to interfere with their play or leisure time. I didn't know how much longer I would have this opportunity and wanted to absorb as much as I could before it was too late. Morning came when I walked into the kitchen and found that breakfast had already been prepared. A huge, massive pile of breakfast laid out in stupidly huge proportions. Karen was already seated at the table with a similarly sized dish in front of her. The sheer amount of pancakes, eggs, scrambled eggs, and sausages looked especially ridiculous against this small but very trim woman. "I think you're a little overcooked," I said dryly, sitting down at the table. Karen only shrugged her shoulders. "I'll eat mine if you eat yours." "You couldn't eat that if you had all day to do it." "I bet I do it better than you," she said with a playful smile. I tapped my fork on my plate, examined the pile of food, and then traced the frame of her smile. "What's that, Karen?" "It looks like a message." "Not a message, no. It's a challenge. This," she pointed to the food, "is the next thing we're going to work on together." Then she unceremoniously put a piece on her fork, and her smile grew even wider. "Let's get fat, honey, and let's do it together." And she shoved it in her face. I lowered my gaze to the food again. "What if I'm not hungry?" "Miss McKay," she whispered, taking a bite, "I don't want to." "Yeah, okay, I'll admit it." I laughed at the sight of it. "I even ate the food." "So what?" It was almost summer when the unthinkable happened. And maybe it was the slight weight she had gained over the months of our big breakfasts, or maybe it was the fact that I had meat on my bones again. We were never really fat. What kind of story do you think that is? Or maybe it was something else. Calmness or a new haircut. She'd styled it into some sort of bob that honestly looked terrible on her, but she planned to experiment when it grew back and find something new she could live with. Hell, maybe it was all about the changing seasons. Maybe it's all about breeding spring or something. No, I'm making excuses. I'm just really drunk. I was drunk as hell. It's funny how time plays a major role in this story. It's embarrassing because I didn't even bother to name him. I never introduced it or informed you of how it was acting or what it was thinking. I never bought it flowers or kissed it goodnight. But time seems to have decided everything in my life at this point, and probably will in the future. Hate, anger, fear, love, they're all just subjects of the great King Time, and he does with them as he pleases. If I ever need to write a sequel, I'll start with this one. You read stories where the characters come out of sexless marriages and just go crazy, betting whatever they can get their hands on. But the truth is that having no sex life at all is still a kind of life, and your body responds to it. This is probably the first moment when the time comes. After a while, your body adjusts to the absence, and it becomes almost hard to even think about love. I know that for a very long time, I hardly thought about it at all. There he goes again. But Karen suddenly started to look and sound like Karen. Like my Karen, my long-lost wife, not the woman who did those other things. It's amazing how big that difference was. And it was a good night, and we spent it with friends, and I drank more than usual, and laughed a little harder than usual, and we danced again, and, well, you know how it is. I suppose you think that's where everything fell into place. Oh, you nod to yourself. This is the part where all is forgiven, and I'm supposed to believe the happily ever after nonsense. But no, no matter how much Karen had endured, suffered, and grown during that year, there were things that would never come back. Flashes of anger or resentment would come out of nowhere, clouding all my thoughts. They could be downright terrifying. Some piece of the puzzle that we once were was missing and couldn't be replaced. And to be honest, I just stopped being me. I changed because of her cheating just as much as she did. It took me years to realize that. What were the differences? I guess I was quieter. I was less emotionally involved in the world around me, except for the girls. I don't think I trusted anyone the way I once trusted the mother of my children. I just couldn't be that person anymore. I hated him for what happened because of his trust. So I guess there is a kind of isolation that persists no matter what you choose to do. But it can be dealt with, and most of the time, I can override it so it doesn't make decisions for me. If you're strong enough, anything is possible. In the 6 months since that first binge, Karen and I have bonded a few more times. I don't know a better word for it. We've never been wild, never been passionate, and never offered each other any moves other than the simplest of moves. And it never felt like it meant anything, or that we were communicating anything to each other by this act. She seemed to take it for granted, but she aged a lot while she waited for me to reappear. Eventually, I think she realized she wasn't expecting anyone. I came home that day and found her waiting for me with a bottle of wine and a manila envelope. "It's an apartment," she explained to no one in particular, her eyes lifeless and staring straight ahead. I studied her, sitting up and trying to remain stoic as she finished the last chapter of our story together. Somehow, I knew I was watching the story unfold. I guess I was impressed by her calmness. I examined the envelope. "Is it for me?" She shook her head. "For me?" I nodded. I didn't bother to ask why. All the time she'd been gone, all the adventures that had taken place without her, had cemented something between me and the girls that she never managed to achieve. Oh, she tried, but the dynamic was set, and the best she could do was stay outside of it. So she did what she promised. She was putting the girls first. "You don't have to," I offered, not knowing if I meant it. "No, I have to. We're doing a good job as it is. It's been a long time, John. Long enough for us to get it right. And the girls are doing fine." She tapped her wine glass. "None of us are living anymore. Soon these kids will be old enough to understand what that means. And they'll start to wonder what it says about us." She tipped the glass back, pouring the wine down her throat. "Don't you want to show them what it means for an adult to be happy?" "I want them to be happy, but maybe you're right, and this is the next step to making that happen. Can we afford it?" She just nodded, expressing nothing, only her jaw dropped. "It'll hurt, but I'll be able to work harder." "You're already working harder." Another nod. I sat up. "The girls?" "They should stay here with you. I'd like to come over in the evenings and be around them, if that's okay with you. I won't be in the way." Her lips pressed together. "But if you try to keep me away from them, I'll kill you." I smiled wider than I ever thought my face would allow, and put my hand over hers. "I'm so glad you're back," I said. So that was it. In those first few months after discovering my wife's infidelity, I was never sure if I had done the right thing. There were flaws in my logic, and any child psychologist would tell you that I made a mistake by staying. Some people probably question whether it's possible to hide so much pain. I don't know what to say to them, except to wonder if they've ever seen the same smiles of two happy children. Even during the hardest months, every second I spent with my girls was a second I didn't feel pain. They were the salve I needed most. But I won't pretend I was thinking straight at the time. But I won't say I would have acted differently had I gone through it again today. Perhaps I was a little biased in my telling of this story, and I apologize for that. It's easier for me to admit to things I don't regret, so that's what I'm openly telling you about. I don't regret that my pain takes a back seat to my parenting responsibilities, and I put that on the page. I don't regret risking the hope of getting my children out of trouble, so the words flow easily. On the other hand, as someone concerned about morality, it's hard for me right now to contemplate the role I played in what happened to Carl. But even that, but I didn't tell you that, did I? Like I said, it's harder to admit what you regret. These days, it seems to me that the world is a bowl full of misery. It saddens me to remember how I have contributed to keeping it full, even on those occasions when it seemed justified. Anyway, years later, when the girls were second graders in middle school, they gave me the smallest but most important trophy of my victory. They were already tall then and had grown into the kind of young people who inspire such pride that it hurts. One day they came home from school and told me about a friend of theirs who was going through a terribly difficult time. Her parents were getting a divorce. "That's so sad," the older one told me. "Her dad lives in an apartment just like her mom. Only it's even worse because he lives so far away. Since the summer, she only sees him on weekends. She says there's so much going on that she forgets to tell him about everything. She's afraid she'll end up feeling like her dad doesn't know her anymore." "At least her parents don't fight all the time anymore," my youngest interjected. "Remember when we were there on the 4th and they started yelling at each other?" "Oh, it was awful." Then she turned to me, her eyes wide and moist. "We missed all the fireworks because we had to spend the whole evening trying to get poor Elizabeth to stop crying. And her parents were so busy being mad at each other that they didn't even stop by to see her. I don't think they noticed she heard anything," my oldest explained. "They probably thought she was having fun rather than suffering from what they were doing, but really they were too busy being mad to think about anyone else." My youngest nodded. "They're still like that now, always saying nasty things about each other in her presence." She shook her head solemnly. "I'm so glad you and Mom never went through anything like that, Dad. I don't know what we would have done." I thought about it for a minute. "I could never get so mad that you stopped being my number one priority," I told them. "Not with anyone. Not about anything. I hope someday I'll be as good a mom as you are, Dad." She smiled. I chuckled. "Don't worry, there's a special love a parent has for their child that solves everything. It may sound weird or a little scary, but it's better than anything else you'll ever know. The two of you take up so much space in my heart, and you hold it so well that I have a little bit left over, and that's all I need. Someday when you have children of your own, and they look at you and smile at you, I think you'll know what I mean." Now, I leaned on the counter. "I don't suppose you'd like a taste of pizza?" Thank goodness they were interested. The end. If you haven't watched the first part of this story, the link will be in the comments or in the description. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.